Plant lore, legends, and lyrics. Embracing the myths, traditions, superstitions, and folklore of the plant kingdom. By Richard Folkard. 1884. Chapter 7. Sylvans, Wood Nymphs, and Tree Spirits. Closely allied to the fairy family, the well-fays, and the naiads, are the Sylvans of the Greco-Roman mythology, which everywhere depicts groves and forests as the dwelling places and resorts of merry bands of dryads, nymphs, fauns, satyrs, and other light-hearted frequenters of the woods. Mindful of this, Horace, when extolling the joys and peacefulness of sylvan retirement, sings, "Me the cool woods above the rest advance, where the rough satyrs with the light nymphs dance." The dryads were young and beautiful nymphs who were regarded as semi-goddesses. Deriving their name from the Greek word drus, a tree, they were conceived to dwell in trees, groves, and forests, and, according to tradition, were wont to inflict injuries upon people who dared to injure the trees they inhabited and specially protected. Notwithstanding this, however, they frequently quitted their leafy habitations, to wander at will and mingle with the wood nymphs in their rural sports and dances. They are represented veiled and crowned with flowers. Such a sylvan deity Rinaldo saw in the enchanted forest when, an aged oak beside him cleft and rent, and from his fertile hollow womb forth went, clad in rare weeds and strange habiliment, a full-grown nymph. The hamadryads were only females to the waist, their lower parts merging into the trunks and roots of trees. Their life and power terminated with the existence of the tree over which they presided. These sylvan deities had long flowing hair, and bore in their hands axes wherewith to protect the tree with which they were associated and on the existence of which their own life depended. The trees of the hamadryads usually grew in some secluded spot, remote from human habitations and unknown to men, where much sweet grass grew higher than grew the reed, and good for slumber, and every holier herb, narcissus and the low-lying melilot, and all of goodliest blade and bloom that springs. Where, hid by heavier hyacinth, violet buds, blossom and burn, and fire of yellower flowers, and light of crescent lilies and such leaves, as fear the fauns, and know the dryad's foot. Theocritus. The rustic deities, called by the Greeks satyrs, and by the Romans, fauns, had the legs, feet, and ears of goats, and the rest of the body human. These fauns, according to the traditions of the Romans, presided over vegetation, and to them the country folk gave anything they had a mind to ask, bunches of grapes, ears of wheat, and all sorts of fruit. The food of the satyrs was believed, by the early Romans, to be the root of the orchis or satyrion, its aphrodisiacal qualities exciting them to those excesses to which they are stated to have been so strongly addicted. A Romanian legend tells of a beauteous sylvan nymph called the Daughter of the Laurel, who is evidently akin to the dryads and wood nymphs, and Mr. Ralston, in an article on Forest and Field Myths, gives the following variation of the story. There was once a childless wife who used to lament, saying, "If only I had a child, were it but a laurel berry." And heaven sent her a golden laurel berry, but its value was not recognized, and it was thrown away. From it sprang a laurel tree, which gleamed with golden twigs. At it a prince, while following the chase, wondered greatly, and determining to return to it, he ordered his cook to prepare a dinner for him beneath its shade. He was obeyed. But during the temporary absence of the cook, the tree opened, and forth came a fair maiden who strewed a handful of salt over the viands, and returned into the tree, which immediately closed upon her. The prince returned and scolded the cook for oversalting the dinner. The cook declared his innocence, but in vain. The next day just the same occurred. So on the third day the prince kept watch. The tree opened, and the maiden came forth. But before she could return into the tree, the prince caught hold of her and carried her off. After a time she escaped from him, ran back to the tree, and called upon it to open. But it remained shut. So she had to return to the prince, and after a while he deserted her. It was not till after long wandering that she found him again, and became his loyal consort. Mr. Ralston says that in Hahn's opinion the above story is founded on the Hellenic belief in dryads, but he himself thinks it belongs to an earlier mythological family than the Hellenic, though the Dryad and the Laurel Maiden are undoubtedly kinswomen. Long before the Dryads and Oreads had received from the sculptor's Greek mind their perfection of human form and face, trees were credited with womanlike inhabitants, capable of doing good and ill, and with power of their own, apart from those possessed by their supernatural tenants, of banning and blessing. Therefore was it that they were worshipped, and that recourse was had to them for the strengthening of certain rites. Similar ideas and practices still prevail in Asia, survivals of them may yet be found in Europe. In Moldavia there lingers the cherished tradition of Mariora Floriora, the Xena, nymph, of the mountains, the sister of the flowers, at whose approach the birds awoke and sung merrily, desirous of anticipating her every wish, and the wild flowers exhaled their choicest perfume, and, bowing gently in the wind, proffered every virtue contained in their blossoms. Yielding one day to the fascinations of a mortal, Mariora Floriora gave herself to him, and forgot her flowers, so that the leaves fell yellow and withered, and the flowers drooped their heads and faded. Then they complained to the sun that the flower nymph no longer tended them, but rambled over the mountains and meadows absorbed with her mortal lover. So a Zmu, evil spirit, was sent, who seized her in his arms, and carried her away over the mountain. Now she is never seen, but when the moon is shining on a serene night. Her plaintive murmurs are sometimes heard in the caverns of the mountain. Sacred groves and their denizens. The Roman goddess Pomona, we are told by Ovid, came of the family of Dryads, or Sylvan deities, and although the nymph frequented not the fluttering stream, nor meads, the subject of a virgin's dream, yet, in garden culture none could her excel, or form the pliant souls of plants so well, or to the fruit more generous flavors lend, or teach the trees with nobler loads to bend. As a deity, Pomona presided over gardens and all sorts of fruit trees, and was honored with a temple in Rome, and a regular priest, called Flamen Pomonalis, who offered sacrifices to her divinity for the preservation of fruit. In this respect Pomona differed from the other Sylvans, who were only regarded as semi-gods and goddesses. The worship of these Sylvan deities, however, by the Greeks and Romans caused them to regard with reverence and respect their numerous habitations. Hence we find that, like the Egyptians, they were fond of surrounding their temples and fanes with groves and woods, which in time came to be regarded as sacred as the temples themselves. Pliny, speaking of groves, says, "These were of old the temples of the gods, and after that simple but ancient custom, men at this day consecrate the fairest and goodliest trees to some deity or other, nor do we more adore our glittering shrines of gold and ivory than the groves in which, with profound and awful silence, we worship them." Ancient writers often refer to vocal forests, in their somber and gloomy recesses, the fright wayfarer imagined, as the wind soughed and rustled through the dense foliage, that the tree spirits were humming some sportive lay. Or, perchance more frequently, chanting weirdly some solemn dirge. The grove which surrounded Jupiter's temple at Dodona was supposed to be endowed with the gift of prophecy, and oracles were frequently there delivered by the sacred oaks. Due honors once Dodona's forest had, when oracles were through the oaks conveyed, when woods instructed prophets to foretell, and the decrees of fate in trees did dwell. In course of time each tree of these sacred groves was held to be tenanted, or presided over, either by a god or goddess, or by one of the Sylvan semi-deities. Impious was deemed he who dared to profane the sanctity of one of these numerous retreats, either by damaging or by felling the consecrated trees. Rapin, in his Latin poem on gardens, says, "But let no impious acts profane the woods, or violate the sacred shades, the gods themselves inhabit there. Some have beheld, where drops of blood from wounded oaks distilled, have seen the trembling boughs with horror shake." So great a conscience did the ancients make, to cut down oaks, that it was held a crime, in that obscure and superstitious time. When Dryopius heaven did provoke, by daring to destroy Aemonian oak, and with it its included Dryad too, avenging Ceres then her faith did show, to the wronged nymph. And with it its included Dryad too, avenging Ceres then her faith did show, to the wronged nymph. When threatened with the woodman's axe, the tutelary genius of the doomed tree would intercede for its life, the very leaves would sigh and groan, the stalwart trunk tremble with horror. Ovid relates how Erysichthon, a Thessalian, who derided Ceres, and cut down the trees in her sacred groves, was, for his impiety, afflicted with perpetual hunger. Of one huge old oak the poet says, "In the cool dusk its unpierced verdure spread, the Dryads oft their hallowed dances led, but the vindictive Erysichthon bade his hesitating servants fell the venerable tree, and, dissatisfied with their speed, seized an axe, and approached it, declaring that nothing should save the oak. He spoke, and as he poised a slanting stroke, sighs heaved and trembling shook the fright oak, its leaves looked sickly, pale its acorns grew, and its long branches sweat a chilly dew. But when his impious hand a wound bestowed, blood from the mangled bark in currents flowed. The wonder all amazed, yet one more bold, the fact dissuading, strove his axe to hold, but the Thessalian, obstinately bent, too proud to change, too hardened to repent, on his kind monitor his eyes, which burned, with rage, and with his eyes his weapon, turned, take the reward, says he, of pious dread, then with a blow lopped off his parted head. No longer checked, the wretch his crime pursued. Doubled his strokes, and sacrilege renewed, when from the groaning trunk a voice was heard, a Dryad I, by Ceres' love preferred, within the circle of this clasping rind, coeval grew, and now in ruin joined, but instant vengeance shall thy sin pursue, and death is cheered with this prophetic view. Garth's Ovid. Tree Spirits. Ovid in his Metamorphoses has told us how after Daphne had been changed into a laurel, the nymph tree still panted and heaved her heart, how when Phaeton's grief-stricken sisters were transformed into poplars, they continued to shed tears, which were changed into amber, how Myrrha metamorphosed into a tree, still wept in her bitter grief the precious drops which retain her name, how Dryope, similarly transformed, imparted her life to the branches, which glowed with a human heat. And how the tree into which the nymph Lotus had been changed, shook with sudden horror when its blossoms were plucked and blood welled from the broken stalks. In these poetic conceptions it is easy to see the embodiment of a belief very rife among the Greeks and Romans that trees and shrubs were tenanted in some mysterious manner by spirits. Thus Virgil tells us that when Aeneas had travelled far in search of the abodes of the blessed, he came to groves, of happy souls the rest, to evergreens, the dwellings of the blessed. Nor was this notion confined simply to the Greeks and Romans, for among the ancients generally there existed a widespread belief that trees were either the haunts of disembodied spirits or contained within their material growth the actual spirits themselves. Evelyn tells us that the ethnics do still repute all great trees to be divine, and the habitations of souls departed, these the Persians call pir and imam. The Persians, however, entertaining a profound regard for trees of unusual magnitude, were of opinion that only the spirits of the pure and holy inhabited them. In this respect they differed from the Indians, who believed that both good and evil spirits dwelt in trees. Thus we read in the story of a Brahmadaitia, a Bengal folk tale, of a certain banyan tree haunted by a number of ghosts who wrung the necks of all who were rash enough to approach the tree during the night. And, in the same tale, we are told of a vacula tree, Mimyasops elengi, which was the haunt of a Brahmadaitia, the ghost of a Brahmin who dies unmarried, who was a kindly and well-disposed spirit. In another folk tale we are introduced to the wife of a Brahmin who was attacked by a Sanchini, or female ghost, inhabiting a tree near the Brahmin's house, and thrust by the vindictive ghost into a hole in the trunk. The Reverend Lal Bihari Day explains that Sanchinis or Sankachernis are female ghosts of white complexion, who usually stand in the dead of night at the foot of trees. Sometimes these tree spirits appear to leave their usual sylvan abode and enter into human beings, in which case an exorcist is employed, who detects the presence of the spirit by lighting a piece of turmeric root, which is an infallible test, as no ghost can put up with the smell of burnt turmeric. The Shanars, aborigines of India, believe that disembodied spirits haunt the earth, dwelling in trees, and taking special delight in forests and solitary places. Against the malignant influence of these wandering spirits, protection is sought in charms of various kinds, the leaves of certain trees being esteemed especially efficacious. Among the Hindus, if an infant refuse its food, and appear to decline in health, the inference is drawn that an evil spirit has taken possession of it. As this demon is supposed to dwell in some particular tree, the mothers of the northern districts of Bengal frequently destroy the unfortunate infant's life by depositing it in a basket and hanging the same on the demon's tree, where it perishes miserably. In Burma the worship of gnats, or spirits of nature, is very general. Indeed, among the Karens, and numerous other tribes, this spirit worship is their only form of belief. The shrines of these gnats are often, in the form of cages, suspended in peepal or other trees, by preference the lupan tree, from the wood of which coffins are made. When a Burman starts on a journey, he hangs a bunch of plantains, or a spray of the sacred eugenia, on the pole of his buffalo cart, to conciliate any spirit he may intrude upon. The lonely hunter in the forest deposits some rice, and ties together a few leaves, whenever he comes across some imposing-looking tree, lest there should be a gnat dwelling there. Should there be none, the tied-back leaves will, at any rate, stand in evidence to the gnat or demon who presides over the forest. Some of the gnats or spirits are known far and wide by special or generic names. There is the min gnat who lives in woods, and shakes those he meets so that they go mad. There is the akakaso, who lives in the tops of trees, shekaso, who lives in the trunk, and bumaso, who dwells contentedly in the roots. The presence of spirits or demons in trees the Burman believes may always be ascertained by the quivering and trembling of the leaves when all around is still. Schweinfurth, the African explorer, tells us that, at the present day, among the Bongos and the Nymphs, woods and forests are regarded with awe as weird and mysterious places, the abodes of supernatural beings. The malignant spirits who are believed to inhabit the dark and gloomy forests, and who inspire the Bongos with extraordinary terror, have, like the devil, wizards, and witches, a distinctive name. They are called Bidabos, whilst the sylvan spirits inhabiting groves and woods are known as Rangas. Under this last designation are comprised owls of different species, bats, and Ndor. A small ape, with large red eyes and erect ears, which shuns the light of day, and hides itself in the trunks of trees, from whence it comes forth at night. As a protection against the influence of these malignant spirits of the woods, the Bongos have recourse to certain magical roots which are sold to them by their medicine men. According to those worthies, no one can enter into communication with the wood spirits except by means of certain roots, which enable the possessor to exorcise evil spirits, or give him the power of casting spells. All old people, but especially women, are suspected of having relations, more or less intimate, with the sylvan spirits, and of consulting the malign demons of the woods when they wish to injure any of their neighbors. This belief in evil spirits, which is general among the Bongos and other tribes of Africa, exists also among the Nymphs. For the latter, the forest is the abode of invisible beings who are constantly conspiring to injure man, and in the rustling of the foliage they imagine they hear the mysterious dialogues of the ghostly inhabitants of the woods. The ancient German race, in whom there existed a deep reverence for trees, peopled their groves and forests with a whole troop of Walgeister, both beneficent and malevolent. A striking example is to be seen in the case of the elder, in which dwells the Hildemoer, elder mother, or Hildevinda, elder queen, who avenges all injuries done to the elder tree. On this account elder branches may not be cut until permission has been asked of the Hildemoer. In Lower Saxony the woodman will, on his bended knee, ask permission of the elder tree before cutting it, in these words: "Lady elder, give me some of thy wood, then will I give thee, also, some of mine when it grows in the forest." This formula is repeated 3 times. Nearly allied to the tree spirits were the corn spirits, which haunted and protected the green or yellow fields. Mr. Ralston tells us that by the popular fancy they were often symbolized under the form of wolves, or of buck-men, goat-legged creatures, similar to the classic satyrs. When the wind blows the long grass or waving corn, German peasants still say, the grass wolf or the corn wolf is abroad. In some places the last sheaf of rye is left as a shelter to the Roggenwolf, or rye wolf, during the winter's cold, and in many a summer or autumn festive rite, that being is represented by a rustic, who assumes a wolf-like appearance. The corn spirit, however, was often symbolized under a human form. The belief in the existence of a spirit whose life is bound up in that of the tree it inhabits remains to the present day. There is a widespread German belief that if a sick man is passed through a cleft made in a tree, which is immediately afterwards bound up, the man and the tree become mysteriously connected. If the tree flourishes, so will the man, but if it withers, he will die. Should, however, the tree survive the man, the soul of the latter will inhabit the tree, and, according to pagan tradition, if the tree be felled and used for shipbuilding, the dead man's ghost becomes the haunting genius of the ship. This strange notion may have had its origin in the classic story of the Argonauts and their famous ship. A beam on the prow of the Argo had been cut by Minerva out of the forest of Dodona, where the trees were thought to be inhabited by oracular spirits. Hence the beam retained the power of giving oracles to the voyagers, and warned them that they would never reach their country till Jason had been purified of the murder of Absyrtus. There is a story that tells how, when a musician cut a piece of wood from a tree into which a girl had been metamorphosed by her angry mother, he was startled to see blood oozing from the wound. And when he had shaped it into a bow, and played with it upon his violin before her mother, such a heart-rending wail made itself heard, that the mother was struck with remorse, and bitterly repented of her hasty deed. Mr. Ralston quotes a Czech story of a nymph who appeared day by day among men, but always went back to her willow by night. She married a mortal, bare him children, and lived happily with him, till at length he cut down her willow tree. That moment his wife died. Out of this willow was made a cradle, which had the power of instantly lulling to sleep the babe she had left behind her, and when the babe became a child, it was able to hold converse with its dead mother by means of a pipe, cut from the twigs growing on the stump, which once had been that mother's abiding place. Thus concludes Chapter 7 of Plant Lore, Legends, and Lyrics. Coming up next is Chapter 8, Plants of the Devil. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, so you may receive new upload notifications as each new volume is released.